So this is when I wanted to relearn DAX, and that was one of the slightly trickier things to manage. But what I did is I convinced myself that I knew nothing about DAX. So that's a different thing. You already know it. You've been using it for 5 years.
Now, I've had a long standing wish of connecting with really brainy and smart people around in the area of data and Power BI and have them over on the YouTube channel and have conversations about data and skill sets and several things that we generally don't really speak about because we are too busy discussing about the technical nitty gritty stuff. Now, this could have been a personal endeavor, but I thought it would be a nice thing to just call them over, have them interviewed, and share that recording with you people. And as the first guest of this In Conversation series that I'm starting new on this YouTube channel, I have none other than Chandu on as the first guest right here. Now, Chandu runs a very famous blog and a YouTube channel. I suggest that you take a look at that. And we spoke at length about conversations around data and developing skills for the future. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did interviewing him. All right, no further ado, you, me, and Chandu. Let's go. Hi Chandu, welcome to the show. I don't know if I should call this as a show or not, but I'm super excited to have you here with me. And even before I let you talk any bit, I would want to start off by telling you a little story, which I did not speak about when we physically met in Delhi. So this was about in the year, I guess 2011 or 2012, and I was leaving a job, resigning from a job, and I was having an interaction with my former boss. He's now a mentor and a very good friend of mine as of now. And he said that, hey, you know what? We both used to follow you in terms of your work on Excel and all that you have done on the blog. And then he said it that one day you might just meet him. And I just maybe let that statement go in the passing in the time. And I didn't really care much about it. But then once I actually got a chance to meet you and speak to you, I was absolutely, elated. And, it was like a fanboy moment come true for me when I actually met you in Delhi. So very glad to have you on the show. For the 1% of the people watching this who do not know you, would you mind talking about what is it that you do and why are you so famous?
Thank you, Chandeep. Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure talking to you today, as well as it was fun interacting with you in Delhi a few weeks ago. So, and it's good to hear the story. But I think around the same time, or maybe a few years after, you were part of the one of the dashboard contests on my blog, if you remember that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think
yeah.
you prepared a financial dashboard. So it's the world is really small and weird in such ways that sometimes you interact with people on email many years before you actually meet them face to face. So
True.
it's good to meet you. My mission in life is to make people awesome in their work, and I do this by using my website where I talk about Microsoft Excel and Power BI and data analytics, as well as my YouTube channel. So those are the two ways in which I share what I'm learning, and I collaborate with the community. This is how I met you online first
Sure.
before we physically met as well. So people can search up chandu.org on either YouTube or on Google or whatever search engine, and then they'll be able to find my work.
How do you typically say about yourself when we casually meet somebody at the airport, or like what would you say that you do for work?
So I normally say I'm an IT trainer. This is a more plain vanilla version of what I'm actually doing, and it is also slightly duller version of what we do. I mean, not that we are putting out fires or anything, but there is a fair amount of excitement in my line of work. But I'm also quite shy, and I don't like to talk to strangers myself. But if somebody asks me, then this is what I say. But if I want the
Okay.
conversation to go along a little bit, maybe I'll mention to them that I'm doing YouTube now. So I might introduce myself as YouTuber. I have not done this to many people,
Sure.
but I am guessing, maybe
Have
next
you
year.
have you come across a lot of people who recognize you in general public and they say, "Hey Chandu, can I have your autograph, please?" Or maybe a selfie. Who knows at this time what is trending.
Not a lot, but I think that is slowly creeping up. The weirdest things happened in India when I was there. I'm originally like I was staying in Vizag, which is on the south coast of India, and one of my wife's family relatives is getting married. So we all went down to another place called Guntur, which is further down the coast. And we were at the wedding. This wedding is an evening wedding, so we got there around 7, and the wedding is kind of it'll go on until 11 or 12. And it's a Christian wedding, so there is a big church, and all my kids and my family, everybody was inside. Me and my wife and my wife's sister and their family, we were outside because they have got such beautiful lighting on the church, because it was happening around the Christmas time as well. So we wanted to take some pictures with our families. So we were outside taking some pictures, and this one person walked up and he said, "Are you Chandu?" And I'm like, "Oh, yes, I am." So then he said he's following my YouTube channel, and he said he's a very close friend to the groom. That's how he's at the wedding. But that's kind of like a very rare occasions. Normally, no, not really. This kind of thing doesn't happen. But that was kind of it felt interesting to see that somebody would meet me in a wedding and they already know what I do.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. So one thing that I've been wanting to ask you is that for the longest time that I have known, you've been preaching about Excel, talking about Excel, especially from your blog that became really, really popular. And when did you decide to slightly bend your learning towards Power BI and the modern Excel
Hmm.
sort of things that are on the rise these days? And how were the initial days for you as learning these things yourself? And was there a gap between when you felt comfortable learning them yourself and you started producing content on those things? How was it for you initial days?
That's a very good question. So, obviously, the whole point of learning and sharing is that you're willing to change your mind, you're willing to accept new ideas. So, that has always been like one of the core philosophies of my life, that I will be like a lifelong learner. So, that is the reason why, in fact, I started the blog also, because I was learning a lot and I wanted to chronicle what I'm learning in a place so that I don't forget easily. Like in college days, when you learn something, you would write down that in a notes, or you will put that in a document and you will refer that because you have got an exam coming up. Once you finish college, once you start working, you don't have that concept. So what are you going to do? So this is how the blog was born, out of that
Sure,
need to have something where I'm talking about what I'm doing in my work and what are the interesting things or new ways of doing stuff.
sure.
So pivoting into the newer modern Excel was a natural thing. It is just that around the same time when Excel started to become modern Excel, so I would probably say most of the Power Pivot and Power Query have existed in one form or another since 2010, 2013.
That's right. That's right.
But that whole packaging and making sure that it is one cohesive thing started happening around 2016. And then around that time I also had quite a few big changes in my personal life. We moved from India to New Zealand, so that was a big change to
Sure.
tackle. The second thing being the kind of work I was doing prior to 2015, 2016 was more or less customer facing. So I would go either I was working full time or I was doing a lot of consulting work. So I had to use Excel in my day to day life as well when
Oh,
I'm not
interesting.
blogging. But 2016 onwards,
And
I stopped.
all of that consulting work was doing, yes, using Excel when you were doing it.
Yeah, predominantly Excel,
Okay,
maybe a little bit of SQL, and
sure,
but I was building a lot of dashboards really. So
sure.
mainly Excel. That's how I was learning newer things as well as getting exposed to new industries and ideas, and which will feed into the blog. But 2015-16 I stopped doing most of that because I didn't feel the need to do all of that, and my kids were getting older, so I wanted to be around them and all of this. So a lot of those things meant when the modern Excel was happening, while I was learning all of that, I didn't have the same need to talk about these things because I was not really using that for a client or even my personal situations. But
Sure.
I still wrote a little bit, and in fact between 2013 and 16, one of my most popular courses and blogs were around Power Pivot.
Oh,
This
interesting.
is before Rob Colley started his I mean, he had his blog, but we collaborated with Rob and we made a course together. So there's a lot of things that I did around that time.
Yeah,
But
fun
then,
fact, if you just
yeah.
go take a look at your student base, I would be one of them. So I took your Power Pivot course. So
Yes, so you would know this, right? So this is how I was learning Power Pivot. I taught the Power Pivot side of it, and Rob taught advanced Power Pivot, where he would talk about some really cool and fun DAX concepts and all of that.
sure, sure.
But that felt like a lifetime ago now when you talk in 2023, but it's just barely
Hmm.
7 8 years ago. uh,
That's right.
and and then later, when Power BI came, that is when I moved to New Zealand, and I have been here for a little while. And I remember talking to some of my friends here that, hey, I'm learning Power BI, I'm doing really cool things with it. And I feel that I should make a course about it. I should put more content out on this.
Hmm.
But I was not really sure if there will be takers for it, because a lot of my readers have been using Excel all this while. So I don't know whether they were going through the same transformation journey as I was going.
Sure,
So that self doubt kind of made it a little harder in the first 6 to 8 months. But I said, oh, whatever, let's just float it and then see, if people will buy it, buy it. Otherwise, it would be a learning experience for me as well.
sure,
So I
sure,
launched
sure.
my very first Power BI course in 2017.
Playdate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's called Power BI Playdate because I,
Playdate.
I
Yeah.
felt like
Okay.
it is a much more playful, interactive platform than the Excel is. Excel is
Right.
quite interactive, but also there is a lot of back end work that you do. Whereas Power BI felt more like take the data, play with it, get the result.
Sure.
And that was like a huge success. Very, we got a good turnout, and then I followed that up in 2019, and even today it is
What is
still
it, like a cohort-based program where people like
not
join?
cohort.
What is it like?
It's more like a recorded online class. Recorded all the videos. People will
Right.
watch from their convenience.
Sure.
Running a
Sure.
cohort is a little bit tricky simply because New Zealand is at the corner of the world. So time zone wise, it's like a very tricky thing to manage if you want to
That's right.
run a batch and people from all over the world would participate. It happened, but it's just that because modern Excel has so many more applications, so many
True.
more ways you could use it, as well as a lot more people were getting into the whole area of sharing content through blogs or meetups or YouTube in the last 10 years since I've started. So uh, I don't say it got crowded, but it was like so beautiful to see so many more people thinking, I will get on here, I will start talking about Power BI, and I'll
Sure.
make this my livelihood. So
Uh,
that was why, obviously, when you have a room with 5 people, you could hear everybody's conversations. But if you have 50 people, then you will have silos where this group
yeah.
is talking, but they don't know what the other group is going on about.
Right.
So you'll
Right.
think that group has completely shut down and gone off. But it has always been there, and it's interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, interesting. So, two more follow up questions based on what you've just said. Was there like an inflection point where you got introduced to the modern Excel or parts of it by somebody, some like a blog or a video? How did you come to know of these things that they exist? Did you face a problem that you were trying to solve, and several series of YouTube searches led you to that thing, or were you formally introduced to it? That was one question.
Hmm.
And maybe once you answer that, I also would want to know that for an influencer like you, what were the initial days like? Would you want to talk about the struggles that you had while learning these things? Because I'm sure you agree that these things aren't very, very straightforward, like writing a formula in Excel. So they require a bit of theory and practicing and a bit of work around, and maybe some dead nights as well to spend around these things.
Like I said, the change to modern Excel or even Power BI is not a sudden one. This is something that Microsoft has been more or less deliberate in their planning. Like Power Query was introduced many, many years ago, Power Pivot was introduced many, many years ago. And I had articles on both of these, and I was learning and using and teaching them one way or another for last 10 years. So there was no like a sudden place. I did learn about them, but I bought some books on Power Pivot because Power Pivot is a especially different type of a calculation engine than the
Sure.
traditional pivot tables and all of
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
So that I remember learning specifically, but Power Query felt more natural because it's kind of like SQL but more UI based, and you're building stuff. So learning that was easy, but I did use all the famous resources. In fact, you know, the this book MBS for
Yeah,
Data Monkey
I
from
do have that.
Ken.
Yes.
I bought this while I was in India. When we moved here, I bought it, that book here. And you can see how
Yes, of course.
really uh, this is the book that because when we were moving to New Zealand, I had like a strict limit on what we can carry from India. So these books made the
Certainly.
cut, and that tells you that they were like, I was using them day in and day out, and I
Sure.
had to brought
Sure.
them with me for that. But then the other bigger changes like dynamic arrays, and nowadays more like lambdas and all of that, it's not like I would wake up one day and then say, oh, this is all come, now I need to learn. It all felt more natural because whether I am talking about Excel or not, whether I'm using Power BI or not, I would always use them in my life. It's just that whatever I get to use them in my life, they tend to be quite a bit more academic or boring scenarios. So I don't want to talk about them in my blog or YouTube. On those fronts, I would like to talk about them used in a more professional setting. So this is the difference between using and learning them versus how you would apply in a work. So I would
Sure.
always wait for a workplace challenge or a consulting scenario where I'm facing a specific challenge, and I use this filter function, or I use the a specific lambda or something else, and then that is what would turn it into a proper tutorial for me. So but I've been using them pretty much ever since they came on board.
Sure.
And initially in the beta releases, I've had them and I've used them. And because I'm also part of the MVP program, Microsoft does tell you what is coming up. They will tell you, hey,
Sure.
these things are coming up, here is the roadmap, this is what is happening, and the MVP groups will discuss various things. So I would read all of that, and I will learn. But sometimes there is a gap between learning and figuring out a real world application for it, and then
True.
finding time and energy and
Absolutely.
resources to write a blog or make a video. That is how it happened. Same with Power BI. But fortunately, after moving to New Zealand, the other thing that happened was after maybe a year or 1.5 years, I started doing a little bit of consulting work for some of the government agencies here. And that
Sure.
opened a whole door of different ways in which Excel and Power BI can be applied. And suddenly there was like a whole bunch of material for me. It was just that I got a little bit lazy. So I was like, if I'm getting 10 ideas through the door, I would pick one and write a blog or
Certainly.
make a YouTube. But otherwise, the others are like, it's just going into my mind. But that was helpful.
Sure.
So
Sure.
yeah, there is
Sure.
no specific point like that. It was just, it's all quite natural and slow burn,
Sure.
really.
What were your
Yeah.
initial struggles while you were
Mm.
learning these things? Like, would you want to talk about
Yeah.
where did you get stuck and how was it initially? I'm very interested to
So
know that.
yeah, this is like many, many years ago. The website chandu.org, I think I registered that in 2006, or probably even earlier than that. So it might be 2000, between 4 and 5. But when
Uh-huh.
I started, it was mainly a place for me to talk about my life. So that's why I went
Sure.
with my name. After like the first 2 3 years of personal rants and rambles and just stories from my life, I changed it and started talking about Microsoft Excel, simply because that was what I was using every day in my work. Up until then I was in college, so there is a lot more variation in my life. Like every day would be different, but once you finish college and you start working, you pretty much have the same day every day. You get up, you go to work, you do some data analysis, you come
Sure.
back and you crash. So the blog stories became quite a bit monotonous. Like today I went, I saw this. Today I went, I saw this. So then I thought, this is boring. Nobody would read this. I was not writing for anybody, but even for me, there was
Yeah.
no excitement in presenting that story. So then I thought, let me just talk about what I'm actually doing, because there is variation in that. So this is how I was using Excel. So I started writing about it. In terms of the actual struggles, because writing, and eventually once you find your audience, then you will be like, okay, I took the step to quit my job and focus on it full time.
Sure.
That is all. But that was a more natural transition. As it happens, it happened. But some of the struggles that I remember nowadays, if you look from 2023, they look almost unbelievable. Like my kids wouldn't believe these things are true. So one of them is the internet. 2009 we had kids and I was still working in 2009, but 2010 April or so I left my job because then I could be with my kids. We had twins, and also be with my wife who is still recovering from pregnancy, and then figure out a way to support the family. So this is
Sure.
when the blog and website were also gaining a lot of traction, so we were getting quite a
Sure.
few people go for the courses,
Sure.
and the AdSense money was good. So I thought this is good enough. Let me get out of the job and do this. But it's
Sure.
not good enough to live in any of the metropolitan cities in India. So we moved. All of us moved from Chennai to Vishakhapatnam, which is a big city today. It is a big city back in 2009 as well. But where we were living, it's not even Vizag. It's like an outskirts suburb of Vizag, and there is no internet connection there.
Right.
Obviously, I need internet connectivity. How am I going to write and maintain my website? So the initial days were like, especially from 2009 until almost 2013 or 14, were pretty much without any broadband connection that is consistently available. So we had a USB pen drive kind of a thing that you would plug into your computer, and it would act like a 3G receiver. But because we were almost in a rural area, there is no consistent 3G signal. So, and I was running these courses where I had to create the videos and upload. So this is what I would do. I would be working offline all day, prepare my course material, articles and everything, and then I would plug this in, and I would hope for the color to turn to blue. Blue or green means it is actually hooked up to 3G network, whereas
Right.
it's some other colors like orange or red would mean it's actually hooked up to 2G connection, which
Sure.
is really slow. And then upload it to my Amazon CDN where the files are hosted, and then once that is done,
Right.
then get it all
Sure.
sorted. But around that time, later after 1 or 2 years, we signed up for a BSNL broadband, which was a little bit more consistent and higher speed, but not enough to even do this kind of a chat.
Sure.
uh, so that was like a very weird thing, but that is the world. That is not a struggle for me back in those days. That is how everybody operated. So
Sure.
it's no different than what I was doing.
Yeah.
Do you look back now, you'll think, oh man, that was just silly.
No,
Because
I mean,
I worked in other countries, and everywhere else we already had high speed internet was the norm.
right.
But even in India, it is the norm in bigger cities. It was just in a smaller place, finding that connectivity was one of the trickiest things. But at a more operational level, figuring it out, like how do I sell things? How do I make it work? What is why something would work, why something wouldn't work? All of that was like a very interesting challenge to figure out. Again, I wouldn't call these struggles. I would say these were good data analysis challenges. The data is there, like why somebody is buying some product and not the other one, why a particular blog article was doing better than the others. All of that
Correct.
information was there.
Right.
It was just for you to analyze it properly, then see, oh, because I'm doing these three things, this is working. Then
Right.
run an experiment to see what if you run those three things again, would it work? If so,
Sure.
then you figured out the pattern. If not, that means you need to go back and learn it. A lot of those, I mean, the correct name for that in the real world now is SEO, or optimizing
AB.
your web page and all of that. So none of
That's
that
right.
was, I mean, the knowledge was available because there's lots of other blogs and websites where you could learn
Sure.
these things.
Sure.
But yeah, that those are some of the initial challenges that I had.
Fast forward 2000, let's say 15, 16 years when you were actually picking up the modern Excel skills. Did you face any learning challenges in terms of getting your understanding around how DAX works or how Power Query works? And would you relate to a beginner who's maybe grappling with these, understanding these technologies at the current moment? Did you find any difficulties in learning these modern Excel things? How were your initial
Yeah,
days?
definitely. I would say Power Query has been much more smoother learning experience for me, simply because I studied computer science engineering. I worked as a
Hmm.
software developer, and I did a whole lot of programming in my life. Even for fun today, I would open a programming editor and write code, because it's, for me, coding is a natural language of expression for me. So I would be able to code. I don't say I'm like a very good coder or anything, but I feel extremely comfortable around any coding environment. So this is just how I'm wired. And for me, Power Query felt like it is a coding language. Maybe the rules are different, but once you understand what is going on, then you can easily build on top of it, because it gives you that framework. Everything is there, and you can manipulate things to get what you want. So that was quite a more simpler journey. On the other hand, DAX for me felt quite a bit harder, simply because I made some mistakes when I was trying to approach the language.
Sure.
Because initially, when I saw Power Pivot back in 2009, and then 2010 to 11, and even to a good extent of 12 and 13, all this while I kept thinking the DAX language is like Excel formulas. If you listen to my initial videos or articles, at places where I would even say calculate is like sum ifs, because this is how
Okay.
I was approaching it. The mental model that I was using is everything in DAX can be re-explained using the Excel formula
Excel
language that
formula
I
language.
already know
Okay.
very well.
Okay.
And there is nothing wrong in thinking like that. But what happens is, if you use that framework, you cannot explain everything. You can only
True.
explain some things, but not all. This is like, you know, to draw an analogy, physicists before Einstein trying to explain the world with the Newtonian principles, they could only go so far. They couldn't explain some of these other things that were happening. And then Einstein came and showed that these other things could be explained with this. So that is a different model. But now we have another challenge where that wouldn't be enough to explain the world in a different way. So same
Sure.
way this happened for me, because I was trying to re-explain DAX to me that everything is Excel. But it was really tricky. And 2013, I did lots of public courses on DAX in US and few other places, and I kept doing them later on as well. And I had a course and everything. I was able to produce a lot. It's just that I was not able to understand it at a deeper level like some of the other people
Sure.
in the DAX world are.
Sure.
So then I kept getting into roadblocks in my consulting engagements where I need to use DAX to solve certain things. And I would always hit a block, and I'll be like, I can't do this. Why is my result not matching
Sure.
what is
Sure.
expected? So this is when I wanted to relearn DAX, and that was one of the slightly trickier things to manage. But what I did is I convinced myself that I knew nothing about DAX. So that's a different thing. You already know it. You've been using it for 5 years. How would you tell yourself you don't know anything?
Okay.
So I
Interesting.
I I told my mind that, forget everything you know about this. Let's start with a clean slate, and let's understand it again in a different way. So this
Sure.
is where, again, rereading some of the books, especially the Definitive Guide to DAX, some of the initial chapters, as well as watching some of the Marco and Russo's videos, as well as some of the other stuff, and reading a lot more forum questions and all of that. It brought me to a place where it suddenly clicked that
Sure.
the approach that I was using, that mental framework that everything should be re-explainable through Excel formulas, is what limits me to actually unlock the potential. So
Certainly.
today I feel so much more comfortable around DAX. I'm not saying I'm an expert. That would be cheating myself and everyone else around me. But I feel really comfortable around DAX, and I can, given a task, I know how to find my way around it. I may not be able to write the smartest measures or the shortest ones or most elaborate ones, but I know how to work with them.
Sure.
And certain developments in the DAX also help. But like, for example, back when I started learning, we didn't have variables. So a lot of
True.
what you could do with DAX was limited to how well you know some of the weirder functions in DAX.
True.
But now, with the arrival of variables, it becomes more like a programming language. You would think through what variables need to be there before you can arrive at the answer, and then work your way around that. So that was
Sure.
like a really helpful change in the language as well.
So one thing that I wanted to know was that how long was that period where you said to yourself that, hey, I'm just going to relearn everything, and till the time you started to feel confident again that, hey, I now can solve problems. So how long was that phase of reinventing your DAX knowledge?
I would probably say between 2014 and 15, like on and off. So yeah, good 9 to 12 months maybe.
Sure, sure. Okay, interesting, interesting.
But this
Now,
is, mind you, most people who are learning DAX in those days were learning it like that only, because there is no
true,
Power BI in those days. So the
correct,
only place to use DAX is Excel, and you would come from a heavy Excel background before you get into DAX. This is like learning
absolutely,
Visual Basic Editor and using VBA.
right.
Normal users wouldn't even click on it. So the persons who are clicking on it are already familiar with every other button in Excel, and this is the only button that they haven't clicked. So this is what they would do. That's pretty much how. Like if you read the Rob Colley's book, most of the analogies were like this only. So the
Correct,
framework that all of us were using was this. It's just that at some point you have to let go of that and move on.
right.
And each of us found our own time and place where we would do that. For
Yeah,
me, it happened
true.
in that time. Some of the like Rob would have probably done that way sooner, because whereas the other people who were using DAX, they came from the SQL Server background, and for them this baggage was not there to begin with.
Right.
So they might be approaching DAX from a SQL query perspective, like what
Perspective,
query would
that's
I
right.
write to get that, and that
True.
might give them the correct answer, correct way of looking at it
Sure.
also in most cases.
Sure. So here is a hypothetical scenario that I would want you to kind of maybe try to answer. So let's just say that I'm an above average user of Excel. I am okay with writing some if, count if, some product functions, generally been on the business side. And now, with the world talking about all these Power Platform technologies, I'm getting to know about Power BI. But alongside Power BI, I also get to hear about a lot of other things like Power Platform, Power Automate Desktop, Report Server, and things like that. Now, this wouldn't have been the picture like 4, 5 years, 6 years ago when Power BI just started, but now it's a different ball game altogether. So, what would you recommend to an above average Excel user making his way through in this data analysis slash Power BI journey, especially from learning it and then using that learnings to maybe get a job or something like that? How should one begin?
I mean, a lot depends on the individual and their drive and what is it that they resonate with. Because many times learning post college has to be driven by your own desires. In college, you have to pass some courses. So even if you don't like something, like most of us would know this personally or have experience in this personally, that either you like mathematics or you don't like mathematics, but you just have to learn it. There is no choice in school days, right? Same with
Right.
languages, same with history or geography or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
You really enjoy it or you don't like it, you don't want to hear another word of it, but you will put up with it because that was part of the curriculum. After you finish that, then all of these roads are open to you. You can get on any road. If you don't like that, you can get off. You're an adult, nobody's telling you anything. So a
Right.
lot of this has to come from inside rather than outside. There is outside pressure also, like if you do this you will get a job, so then you would learn, but that is kind of like
Sure.
going back to college times. So someone who has all these choices, the easiest thing to do would be to dabble a little bit with everything and then see where your heart is, or what is the first thing that you resonate well enough with. You're not looking
Sure.
to make a life partner, you're just trying to see, would I have a follow up date with this particular tool? So whether it is Power Automate, Power BI, or DAX, Power Query, whatever is the pick, try them all. It's super easy to get information. Do a simple 1 hour tutorial or sign up for a mini course or anything where the commitment is only literally 3 4 hours,
Uh-huh.
and then at the end of it you will say, oh, this one looks interesting to me. And then the next step for you could be just travel with that until you are above the crowd. So an average person
I
would have
see.
done the same thing like you have done, but
Right.
you would probably learn, let's just say your first point of call is Power Query. You
Right.
would learn how to use Power Query well enough that if you accidentally stumble in advanced editor, you wouldn't freak out. You will know what that is saying and you'll know how to get out of it, continue your journey. So something like that, if you given some messed up data, you know how to work your way around it to make it in
Right.
a reasonable shape and size. So once you know that, that is enough. You leave that road, you come back to the starting point, and again you dabble again, you pick up a new mate and move on. The thing that most people struggle with, personally, I never struggled because I look at things slightly differently, but most people seem to be get stuck on what is the one thing that I should learn so that I'm set for my life.
True.
You're not marrying these things. Why do you need to know only one thing? Even the most complex tools like DAX or programming in Python or whatever you pick, you cannot keep yourself entertained and enlightened with that lifelong. They'll get
True.
boring after some time. So why do you want to commit yourself to that one thing for your entire life? Just learn it enough so that you're employable, so that you're considered to be, let's not use the word expert, but you're considered to be the go-to person if that problem needs to be solved. That is also an overkill in a large organization. You know your way around it, let's just say that.
Sure.
Learn well enough and then come back and learn something else. Your life is fairly long. Let's
Right.
just say any tool, whether it is Power Query, Power Pivot, or Power Automate, whatever it is, it would take 6 months to 12 months of deep learning. So learn for that much time and then come back and pick up another thing. Maybe take a break for 2 3 months and then learn something else. In 5 years' time, you would have learned pretty much everything there is to learn in the power universe. You can then go
Sure.
and learn something else like Tableau or business domain skills, how to communicate better, how to present better. All of these are good skills as well. So
Yes,
you
for
know
sure.
so that is what I would say to somebody who is an advanced Excel user. Don't think of this as lifelong commitment. Pick one, travel with it for some time, come back and do something else.
Now that you know of a couple of things, maybe a lot of things around the Power Platform and the Power products which are out there, solving a lot of diversified problems for businesses. Let's say for Power BI, would you pick up a path, an ideal path, now that you can look backwards and maybe look towards your own journey and for the other thousands of people that you've helped? Would you set a path for yourself that you would ideally have traveled and that you would recommend in order to learn Power BI? Like pick up maybe DAX first or Power Query first, and what in Power Query first? So maybe an ideal path.
Yeah, this is what I tell nowadays when I do a training also, that focus on the data, make sure that you are able to clean it and transform it as much as necessary. So that means learning Power Query
Sure.
and trying to push the problems to Power Query layer so that your DAX gets simpler. I'm not trying to say it's the hard language, but it is so much less visual than Power Query is,
For sure.
because you can't see what's happening until you lay it out on the screen. And even when it is laid out, you will not be able to see what are all the intermediate things it has done to get
True.
you that result. Of course, there's tools to do that,
Sure.
but a novice user wouldn't know any of those to begin with, because it kind of has that black box mindset to DAX. It's easier to work in a platform where that visual feedback is available to you instantly. Any change you make, you see what happens to your data right away.
Right.
And so solve your data problems in Power Query, or better still, push it even further out of your thing. Because if you're analyzing the data with Power BI, chances are there might be someone else in the organization whose job description is to provide you data.
Correct.
So maybe get them to help you with some of the transformation, like ask them to write a better SQL query rather than putting up
Right.
with whatever you're given with. So building those skills, and then once that is done, use Power Query. And once that is done, understand the modeling side of things, like what are some of the ideal structures for setting up your data, how to model it, and then focus on and the core principles of DAX, like what is the evaluation context, how things really happen behind scenes. So get visually how that is, like build some mental models that will help you understand what would happen if you were to put this measure here on this particular
Sure.
screen at this particular time. How
Sure.
would that really work? So build that knowledge with the simple measures only. No need to write complex ones. Even simple ones can be useful for many complicated things because of the interactive nature of Power BI. And then start working in a more practical sense in the business, so that you are solving real world problems, and you build expertise in one or two business areas. Like maybe you're doing a lot of DAX to do inventory analysis, then the type of DAX that you learn would be very specific than something else that someone uses
For
for
sure.
financial statements or online marketing or whatever. So learn those and do a lot more implementation around it, and you will build your own best practice. And then the third thing is understand how to present that information, how to visually lay it out, what choices would you make with the charts, and how do you color them, how do you mix the interactions within them, and
Certainly.
what messages will you be able to drive from it. Are you able to better yourself by thinking more along the lines of what the users really want rather than what the data is saying? That is the general path. The challenge that I'm finding, especially with Power BI being such a visual medium, is Excel is also a visual medium, but an Excel person is not expected to come up with a highly polished image per se. I mean, people
Certainly.
have
Yeah, yeah.
been doing it, like
Exactly.
you are an example, your dashboard in that context was so visually well polished. So people have been doing it, but that was not the expectation for an average or above average Excel spreadsheet. So there was no need for an Excel advanced user or even an expert to shine in that. They were expected to be able to really good at take data, write formulas or pivots and get the answers. So that was a
True.
more narrower task. Whereas with Power BI, the expected skills and the expertise required to shine really gets widened. So you need to be good in Power Query, you need to be good in Power
True.
Pivot, you need to be good in visual storytelling, you need to be
So
good
true.
in communicating. So it gets so much more diverse. In many organizations are not able to silo this yet. They're not able to hire a designer, a DAX developer, a Power Query developer, like that. So they will hire one
But
person to do all of this.
but do you think it's a good idea to maybe do that? Like hire like an ETL guy separate and a data modeling guy completely separate and then a visualization guy completely separate, and nobody really knows what's going on and how would they integrate with one another over a single model?
That's the other problem. The tool is not built like that. That
Yeah,
if you lack
true.
the knowledge of model, if you don't know which way the relationships are pointing, you will not be able to get what you want. It is
True.
kind of expected that somebody who's building the visualizations would know their way around the data model. They know what DAX has been applied, and they know how to work with more DAX. Like, for example, I have a chart and I want to have a custom title there that tells more story rather than a default title. What is the way out? I have to use a conditional format title where I'm
True.
expected to put a DAX statement to generate that. So the expectation is always there. It's not built for
Yeah, right.
here is the model you build. I mean, there is a
Right.
an
I
option
get
in
it.
Power BI where you inherit the model altogether rather than the data and you just build. But then that gets quite limiting, right? You know, your hands are tied. You have this beautiful tool, but
True.
you could only just
Right.
make visuals. So this is probably one reason. The second reason is cost, right? Why would you hire three people where one person with a little bit more pressure can do it?
Sure.
Probably this is and none of this really matters if these three people are useless when it comes to understanding the business domain, the customer
Absolutely.
needs and what they
Absolutely.
want. So the real skill across all of these three is not working with the tool but understanding what your audience are requiring, what is underlying in the organization in terms of data, how various systems are available, and what matters and when it matters. So that knowledge is more critical than any of this.
Absolutely.
That's why I find that it's almost like juggling at some point, where you have to carefully balance three or four priorities to be a successful Power BI person. But because it is so much more productive than a traditional reporting paradigm like Excel or anything else, once you build it, once you have it fine tuned, there is almost no repeat work for you. It will just work on itself, it will keep
Absolutely.
producing things. So I think that's a valuable skill set to acquire. It will take a lot longer to, I mean, individually learning wouldn't take long, but to understand how that orchestra is happening and how everything is playing
True.
with each other and how to balance and when to call it off at Power Query level, when to call it off at DAX level, when to just
Absolutely.
throw your
It's
hands up and say this is not at all possible with this tool. You can spend forever trying to customize something only to realize this is just not possible. It's not going to work at all because that's how the tool is
sure.
built.
Interesting. Interesting. I wanted to ask maybe a few questions about just yourself. How do you pick up the skills? Like, how does Chandu pick up skills to learn for the future? Do you have any things in mind that you think of that, hey, maybe this is what I should start learning today? How do you pick up your own skill sets?
That is an interesting question. I mean, there is lot obviously couple of motivations for me. One is what is it that my own customers or my own viewers or users are asking me to talk about. So, for example, I met with some of my YouTube viewers in Hyderabad in a small meetup over the New Year,
Hmm.
and most of them were talking about, hey Chandu, we want you to explain how to use Power Automate because we understand your style. We want you to explain it. So I already know Power Automate. I've been using it with a client for the last 1 year, and I feel fairly comfortable around that specific area of Power Automate that we are doing. But I didn't want to invest more time or learn or explain it, simply because it will be another thing for me to juggle as an individual, right? So I'm already writing and talking about Power Query, Power Pivot, Power BI, Excel, VBA, SQL. So this is another thing for me to balance. But because that's what they're asking, now I am considering it, and hopefully in future, sometime next month or in the next 3 months, I will
Sure.
make a video or a tutorial on how to use Power Automate. So that's one motivation for me. If I'm hearing a lot of feedback saying, we want to learn this, we want you to guide us about it, then that will become a priority for me. The second thing is, for me, because I like to learn, I want to learn through my life. I don't want to put myself in a treadmill where I have to learn. I
Sure.
want to keep it like I like to learn. I wake up, I should be excited about learning. So there should be an inherent element of fun or amusement or mystery or one of those kind of forces in it for me to learn. So if I'm learning something where it feels like I'm just learning it for the sake of learning, I would slowly taper off and then not worry about it again. So what is it that would excite me as a learner? That is something that I would learn. So to give some examples, because I do a lot of video editing, I thought, oh, let me learn a video editing software where the editing process is either too much more mysterious or a little bit more fun. So that's how I ended up
Sure.
learning how to use Adobe Premiere, because I didn't know how to use it. It's a different ecosystem altogether, and I got in, and now I feel comfortable around it. So that is the second side. The same with making videos. It's a whole different beast than writing articles. You have to think about
Sure.
a lot of different things like audio, lighting, set design.
Right.
All of that is a different thing altogether, and then storytelling. So there is a lot more challenge, scope for making mistakes, scope for experimentation. All of that is exciting for me, so I learned that.
Sure.
And then the third thing is the need. If I'm working in a client place or if I'm doing something personally and I need to know something, then I will learn it. Sometimes I will be doing and I feel like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing 17 times. Maybe there is a way that we can use to automate this. So then I would go and investigate and learn about whether it is Power Query where the automation could be done, or Python or something else where that can be done. So I would learn that
Sure.
and enhance. So those are the motivations for me. It all depends how I feel at that time. My priorities, let's just say from 2023, this point, if I'm looking forward for the next 12 to 18 months, is to get more into Power BI, understand it even better,
Sure.
so that I can share that information with others and help them also get on this path. And then also maybe slightly expand it out to some of the Power cousins like Power Automate or Power Apps. Those are
Sure.
the things. And if time permits and if I feel excited, I want to learn Office scripts. That is another thing. I saw some demos. I thought this looked cool. I'm just waiting for some sort of a need or something else to push me, and once that is there, I will learn those things.
Sure. Oh, just taking back from the question that you just answered a while ago about learning different skills, how much would you consider learning outside of Power BI that can indirectly impact your understanding of building better reports or being a better business intelligence professional? And if that is such a thing that learning outside of Power BI can actually help you, what would those things be in your opinion?
Uh, so you mean learning outside as in? not
Like
specifically. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not learning DAX or I'm not learning Power Query itself, but maybe I'm learning other things, maybe storytelling or
Mm.
maybe business. So anything which is not directly in the ecosystem of Power BI, how would that help me be a better business intelligence professional? And what would those things be in your opinion?
My recommendation is that that is how everybody should approach as well, rather than as an afterthought. So if we take out Power BI, then imagine you have to do some data analysis and then tell your business what should be done or what is going on. Usually this is why somebody would hire you, right? So then the other things that you need to know to succeed, ignoring there is a big black box where the analysis happens, is you need to understand what the business is all about, specifically your particular area of the business, not the entire business. Let's just say you're a human resources analyst, then you need to know what happens in your domain
Sure,
and how it connects to the wider business that you're operating in. So you
sure,
need to know the domain, you need to know how to work with the people that are there within your circle and the wider circle. So who is providing what, how to work with them, how to influence them, how to get what you want from them, how to persuade them. All of those are vital skills. If you don't have any of that, it doesn't matter how beautiful your Power BI or Excel file looks. Nobody listens to it, then what's the value in there, right? So that, and then also understanding what are some of the actual methods that you use for doing the analysis. So this is where having a little bit of understanding of statistical and mathematical models,
true,
and how to do some of those KPI calculations for your line of business. What is the correct definition? What does it mean? And when to start worrying about the numbers. So if you are like an
right.
outsider, so in business school, you have a class. Let's just say class has 100 marks. If you finish the class, you'll get like 100 marks. About 20 or 15 marks are given for class participation. So this is to encourage people to not sleep and be active in the class, ask questions, or when the professor is asking questions, put your hand up and answer. Because sometimes, to pass the course, you have to get maybe, let's just say, 40 marks. This 15 or 20 forms a significant chunk if you are one of those people who will coast through the course. So a lot of people, what they would do is they'll use the class participation as a means to score some points rather than participate genuinely. So
I
they'll
see.
do, like for example, the professor would say, last year we have $100 million sales, and then this year the company made $180 million sales. So that's the statement the professor would make. And then this class participation person would put their hand up and say, so does it mean the sales have gone up by 80%? There is nothing new added here. This is like 100 to 180 is 80%. You don't need to pontificate and say that out. It's
Hmm.
already there, but you make that. So the we used to call this as blow or blinding light of obvious wisdom. So basically you're giving a blow job here, because all you're doing is you are not adding anything new to that, you are just repeating but in a different way.
Right.
So many times analysts also fall into this trap where they take something obvious that is happening in the business and then they just put it out because they have no idea what the business is or what the actual way of looking at the data is. So this is why learning some of those techniques and going a little deeper than just doing sums and averages all the time is quite helpful. Then you will be able
Sure.
to, in some very specific situations, you will have to go way deeper and understand so much more, but at a start learning those. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you work with people, you're getting the data, you know how to persuade them, you understand the knowledge. How do you share your thoughts? How do you present it? How do you polish it? How do you finesse it? How do you write a persuasive email? How do you put it in a document? What do you do when people are not listening, and at what point you will pick the fights? What are the fights that you will pick?
True.
What fights you will let go? Because sometimes it is like a game and you need to know how to play the game, otherwise you will lose out. So I'm not saying get into office politics and all of that, that's a different thing altogether, but just to understand what the motivations of each party in a meeting are, why somebody is saying what they're saying, and
Sure.
then that will help you persuade people better, negotiate better, and get the outcomes that you want for your
Sure.
business. So I think that is the whole perspective. And if you see all of this, about 60 to 70% of it has got nothing to do with Power BI. Only when you get into Power BI, you need to know what DAX you would use to do the this statistical concept into DAX. But
Right.
otherwise, it could be Power BI, it could be Tableau, it could be Excel, it could be good old pen and paper. It doesn't matter what you're using. As long as you're good in this, you will be able to figure it out, or you will be able to
Certainly.
say that confidently. I don't know this, I cannot do this, but let's just bring someone else to do this part so we can move on.
Sure. Have you tried the in thing, like interacting with Chat GPT with some sort of Excel or Power BI related things, trying to get your questions answered by the bot?
Yeah, I tried a little bit before going on the holiday. I did have an account registered there, but after coming a couple of times I tried, it was always busy because I think they're kind of bursting at the seams now.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I'm just waiting for it to become a little bit more available so I could test out some things. But yeah, I'm excited to see what it is capable of and how people are using. I'm also seeing a
Sure.
lot of situations where it wouldn't do an ideal or correct job altogether. But yeah, it's just a start, right? Remember how Google
Absolutely.
used to be as a search engine when it first appeared versus how it is today. So
Absolutely.
I'm just hoping that sort of transformation would happen here as well, probably in a lot less time.
Interesting. Interesting. I have a couple of rapid fire questions to wrap it up with you, Chandu. It was
Yeah,
so. Let's just see how do you answer those. If you have to do a lookup, what does intuitively your fingers type? VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, or index match?
X lookup.
Has it changed over a course of time? Was it something else before?
Yeah, I was using VLOOKUP pretty much all the time, and I think since XLOOKUP came, I started just using that, and I don't look back now. I only use index match if that was the only option to get what I want. Otherwise,
Sure,
it's VLOOKUP, and most of the time I don't use lookups. I use the relationship option, or I try to avoid doing lookups if possible because they then I can just get what I want.
sure,
But yeah, sometimes.
sure. Um, Between Excel and Power BI, what would you like to talk about more on your channel? Excel or Power BI?
Yeah,
Still,
for the
till this date.
next year or two, so I might be talking a little bit more of Excel. It's just Excel has like a really massive user base compared to Power BI, so a lot more of my audience are looking for Excel information, and they are learning. They're using Excel every day, so that's what I would talk about.
Beautiful and intelligent visuals or a really good data model? What is your pick?
I'd probably go with beautiful and intelligent visuals. Nobody looks at data model. Data model is for you to look at. It's like the mishmash of cables behind your,
That
beautiful
is true.
server. So,
Ironically, that's true. The end user is going to take a look at what you've produced on the canvas more
yeah,
than what
as
you
long
have
as
at the
it is
back end.
correct, I think that should be the third
Yeah.
one: beautiful, intelligent, and accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Let's say we make you the product owner of Power BI desktop. What would you add or edit? Maybe one or two things.
I would improve the visualization because this is what I mean with the previous answer as well. Whatever you are showing is what creates the impression, everything else is secondary. So it's a little bit pity that the focus seems to be other way around with the Power BI. I mean, I'm not saying that those other things need improvement. It's just that they're already so highly refined as they stand. Like Power Query and Power Pivot offer really high amount of capability with what we could achieve compared to the very first version, whereas
Sure.
the visuals have remained exactly same largely. Like simple capabilities like ability to change what gets on the axis, how the titles are presented, the positioning of some of the things on the screen, ability
Sure.
to change the gaps, and all of that. And doing even simplest things seems to take a circuitous route of 17 different clicks before you can do it. And even then, it wouldn't look good or pretty or accurate. And even simple things like alignment between visuals, if you have a chart and a table, sometimes the alignment would be off, and no matter what you do you cannot get it right. simply because the inner padding between these is different for whatever weird
True.
reason, and there's no way to customize some of that. So yeah, I would actually sit and have a solid rethink about that, and make better choices all over again.
Sure. One last one to go. Could you give us your three or maybe two, howsoever you would like to give, a non Power BI yet data books that you've read recently or maybe in the past?
So one book that I recommend nowadays is Storytelling with Data. It's a book by Cole Nussbaumer Knopflick, and it's a good book that will give an overview of how would you tell stories from your data, what charts you would make, how would you
Sure.
emphasize on what matters, and how do you use charts so that you could do a better persuasive communication. And then another book, this is an older book but a non-designer's design book, especially if your job involves presenting things, creating stuff so others will see
Sure.
it,
Sure.
then you need to know how to design things. So yeah, those are the books that I would recommend.
Excellent. Excellent. The first one I have it, maybe the second one I'm going to get it. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's a
yeah.
small book, and probably you are well past that book by now, but you could skim it somewhere in the library and then see if it's for
There is
you.
always, a couple of reminders, little knickknacks that you often get from books that, you kind of forget and you haven't implemented, and you get fresh perspectives of working, with the old things in a new perspective the next time when you work with them. So
Yeah,
it's always helpful. Okay, great, Chandu. I'm so glad that we were able to do this. I've already passed um, the sort of the 1 hour time limit that generally people have. I've gone past that, but
no, it's all right.
I'm so glad you. I thought of you being the first guest, and I was able to do it. That's itself is an achievement for myself. I'm just happy to do that. And in case people would like to find you, where should they find you, or like where should they connect with you?
I'm active on YouTube, so they can search for Chandu on YouTube, and they'll find my channel, and that's the first place where they can connect with me.
Excellent, excellent. So glad to have you here, Chandu, and I hope to have you once again sometime later. But thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Chandeep, and wish you all the best with your show and in your business and everything as well. And yeah, let's connect again some other time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.